Chapter 1. A Stranger in the Dark. The rain was relentless, hammering down on the rusted rooftops of Old Bastion like a relentless drum, washing away the filth of the Undercity but never truly cleansing it. This was the kind of place where secrets thrived, where fugitives and criminals disappeared into the cracks of civilization, swallowed whole by the endless maze of metal corridors and forgotten industrial ruins. The city was built in layers. The rich lived high in the spires where the sky was clear, and the rest of us existed below, beneath the neon glow of failing advertisements, where the air was thick with smoke and the scent of oil and decay. I had lived in this sector for 6 years, repairing old ships and stolen tech, keeping my head down and my hands busy. I wasn't a hero, wasn't some rebel fighting against the galaxy's injustices. I was just a mechanic, a man who had learned the hard way that sticking your nose in the wrong business got you killed. My shop was small, wedged between 2 abandoned factories, the kind of place no one looked twice at unless they were desperate or dangerous. And that night, when my doors slammed open and the sensors tripped, I knew my life was about to change forever. I had been working late, adjusting the plasma injectors on a stolen Syndicate hovercraft, when the motion alarms blared a warning. My instincts took over. I grabbed the pulse pistol from under my workbench and turned toward the entrance, heart pounding. The door had been sealed, locked with reinforced bolts, but it had been forced open, not blasted, not hacked, but physically torn apart. And then she stepped inside. She was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a tattered cloak soaked through with rain, her breath ragged and unsteady. Even under the dim glow of my workshop's flickering lights, I could see the deep blue hue of her skin, the bioluminescent veins that pulsed faintly along her arms and temples. Dominion. There was no mistaking it, the markings of a high-ranking officer, the way she carried herself despite her injuries, the sheer presence of her standing there, towering in my doorway like a specter from a war I wanted no part of. She took 1 step forward, then staggered, blood dark and almost violet seeping between her fingers where she clutched her side. But despite the obvious pain, her golden eyes burned with something fierce, something desperate. I didn't lower the gun. "I need shelter," she rasped, her voice carrying the sharp accent of Dominion military officers, clipped and commanding even in its weakness. "You will give it to me." I exhaled sharply, my grip tightening on the pistol, my mind racing. The Dominion was the most feared military force in the galaxy, an empire built on conquest and absolute control. Their generals were untouchable because no one dared cross them and live to tell the tale. And yet, here one was, bleeding out in my shop, demanding my help, which meant only one thing. She was running from something, and whatever she was running from was coming. "Not interested," I said, stepping back. "Find another hiding hole." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of frustration flashing across her face. "You don't understand." I let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, I understand plenty. You've got people looking for you, and the moment they find you here, I'm dead alongside you." She took another step forward, and I could see the way her body trembled, the way she was barely holding herself together through sheer will. But despite that, she was still dangerous. I could see the way her muscles tensed, the way her fingers twitched like she was resisting the urge to reach for a weapon. "If you help me," she said, her voice tight, "I will give you something no human has ever had." I raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to bargain." She inhaled sharply, wincing as she pressed harder against her wound. "You have no idea what I'm offering you." I studied her carefully, weighing my options. If I turned her away, she'd probably die before making it 3 blocks in this part of the city. If I let her in, I was putting my life on the line for a woman who could kill me the moment she decided I wasn't useful. And yet, something about the way she looked at me, the sheer desperation in her eyes, told me that whatever she was running from was bigger than just some bounty hunters or rival factions. Something about this felt too important to ignore. I sighed and lowered the pistol. "Fine, but if you try anything, I'm putting a bolt through your skull." She let out a slow breath, then collapsed. I barely caught her before she hit the floor. A deal with the devil. I moved fast, dragging her deeper into the shop and locking the doors behind us. The alarms were already set to silent mode, alerting me to any movement outside, but I wasn't taking chances. I hauled her onto the old metal table I used for heavy mechanical work, grabbing my medkit and yanking off her soaked cloak. Beneath it, I saw the full extent of her injuries. Deep gashes along her ribs, plasma burns on her arms. She had been in a fight. A bad one. Her breathing was shallow as I pulled out a sterile injector and pressed it against her neck, pumping a low-dose stim into her system to keep her from slipping further. Her muscles tensed slightly at the injection, but she didn't wake up. I worked quickly, sealing the worst of the wounds with auto-sutures, injecting nanogel into the deeper gashes to promote accelerated clotting. I wasn't a doctor, but I had patched up enough mercs and smugglers in my time to know how to keep someone from dying. By the time I was done, she was still unconscious, but stable. I leaned back against the wall, staring at her. Who the hell was she? More importantly, who was hunting her? I didn't have to wait long for my answer. The alarms in my shop blared a silent warning. Something was outside. My pulse spiked as I moved to the monitors, fingers flying over the control panel, bringing up the external cameras. The rain made visibility poor, but I could see figures moving in the dark, their silhouettes barely distinguishable against the neon-lit streets. Not local gangsters. Not common thugs. They moved too cleanly. Too precise. Dominion Black Ops. I swore under my breath. They were already here. I turned back to the unconscious alien general lying on my table. And in that moment, I realized I had just made the worst decision of my life. But it was too late now. I grabbed my pistol, took a deep breath, and prepared for war. Chapter 2. The hunt begins. The silent alarms pulsed through my neural HUD, flashing red warnings along the edges of my vision as I stared at the figures moving just beyond my shop's perimeter. The rain distorted the images on my security feed, but I didn't need a perfect visual to know what I was dealing with. Dominion Black Ops. That was bad. Really bad. Black Ops teams didn't operate in half measures. They weren't bounty hunters or corporate enforcers who could be bribed or distracted. They were executioners. Ghosts. The kind of people sent in when the Dominion wanted to erase someone from existence without leaving a trace. And they were here. For her. I turned to the unconscious alien general lying on my work table. Her breathing was steadier now, her wounds no longer bleeding thanks to the emergency field sutures I'd applied. She had an unnatural resilience to her, even in sleep muscles still taut, as if her body refused to accept vulnerability. I had no idea who she was, and I sure as hell had no idea why the Dominion wanted her dead. But I did know one thing. If I didn't act fast, we were both dead. A game of shadows. I moved swiftly through the shop, dimming the main lights while activating the emergency generators. The blackout sequence kicked in, casting the room in a dull red glow, a trick I had installed years ago to make it harder for infrared scanners to get a clear heat signature inside. It wouldn't keep them out forever, but it would buy me a few minutes. Outside, the figures fanned out, moving with careful, methodical precision. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. I knew their tactics. Surround. Isolate. Cut off escape routes. They were probably already setting up a jammer to block outgoing communications. Not that it mattered, no one in Old Bastion would lift a finger to help me. I glanced down at the woman. "Wake up, damn it," I muttered. She didn't stir. I cursed under my breath. I didn't have time to play nurse. I moved toward my weapons locker, yanking it open and grabbing the first rifle within reach. It wasn't much, an old plasma repeater with a couple of spare cells, but it would do. I crouched low and moved to the shop's reinforced entrance, listening. The rain muffled most of the sounds outside, but I caught the faintest shuffle of movement, the unmistakable sound of boots on wet pavement. They were close. Too close. I exhaled, steadying myself. I wasn't a soldier, never had been, but I knew how to fight when cornered. And right now, I was very, very cornered. Contact. The first crack of plasma fire shattered the air. A single warning shot, fired into the air. They were testing me, seeing if I would panic, if I would run. I didn't. Instead, I moved, sliding toward the side of the shop where I had a secondary escape hatch. It was an old service tunnel, barely functional, but it might be enough. Then, a voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "Mechanic, we know you're in there." Cold. Precise. No emotion. "Step outside and hand over the fugitive, and we'll let you live." Lies. I had seen what Dominion Black Ops did to people they deemed liabilities. No one walked away. No one. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, glancing back at the unconscious woman. "You better be worth this," I muttered. Then, I pulled the trigger. Firefight in the storm. The first shot took out the closest soldier. His shield flickered, but my plasma round punched through his chest plate, sending him crumpling to the ground before he could react. Then all hell broke loose. The others opened fire, a torrent of blue-white plasma bolts ripping through the walls of my shop. Sparks flew as the metal plating melted under the onslaught. I ducked, rolling behind cover, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. I wasn't aiming to kill, just to buy time. I had one goal: get to the service tunnel. But the Dominion soldiers were too fast, too well coordinated. They pushed forward, forcing me back, corralling me. They wanted me alive. I gritted my teeth. Not gonna happen. A burst of gunfire sent me diving behind my workbench. My cover wouldn't last long. I needed a way out. Fast. That's when I heard it. A low hum. Then, a growl. Then a flash of movement from the table. The woman was awake. A warrior reborn. I barely had time to react before she was on her feet, moving faster than should have been possible for someone that injured. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with a fierce golden light. Her body coiled with raw power, her bioluminescent veins pulsing like a star about to go supernova. And then, she moved. I had seen fighters before. Mercenaries, ex-military, syndicate enforcers. But she wasn't like them. She was something else entirely. She was Dominion-born, a product of their war machine. And now, she was unleashed. She ripped the gun from my hands, her other arm snapping out in a blur of motion, grabbing a knife from my workbench and hurling it with perfect precision. The blade found its mark, sinking into the throat of the nearest soldier. He collapsed without a sound. She was already moving again, grabbing my rifle, flipping it, and unloading a full plasma burst into the advancing squad. The Dominion soldiers didn't stand a chance. Within seconds, it was over. Only silence remained, broken only by the rain tapping against the scorched metal of my ruined shop. She stood there, chest rising and falling, her hands still crackling with energy. Then she turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. Recognition. You. She breathed. I frowned. What? You're the one they warned me about. Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her voice suddenly calm. You saved me, she said. Now, I will give you what I promised. I swallowed. And what's that? She reached out, pressing a hand against my chest. And then everything changed. I felt it. A surge of energy, raw and ancient, flowing through me like a tidal wave. My vision blurred. My body burned not in pain, but in power. And then I knew. She hadn't just given me a gift. She had made me something more. Chapter 3. The Power of the Unknown. The moment her hand pressed against my chest, the world shifted. It wasn't pain, not in the way I understood it. It was something deeper, something raw, something that dug into the very fabric of my being and rewrote it from the inside out. My vision blurred, my pulse thundered in my ears, and suddenly, the rain outside, the distant hum of the city, even the smell of burning plasma from the battle, just moments ago, all of it became sharper. Too sharp. Too much. I staggered back, gasping, my hands instinctively clutching at my chest. My veins felt like they had been set on fire, but not in a way that burned, more like something inside me was waking up, something that had always been there but had never been given the chance to breathe. She watched me carefully, golden eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. Her stance was still strong, despite the wounds I had patched up, despite the exhaustion I knew she must have been feeling. And yet, she had just done something to me, and I didn't know if I would survive it. I stumbled, reaching for the edge of my workbench, my breathing ragged. What the hell did you just do to me? Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head, as if studying me like I was the one who had suddenly become alien. Then, finally, she spoke. I gave you a gift. A gift. I let out a ragged breath, forcing myself to steady. My heart was still hammering in my chest. My muscles felt heavier, yet stronger, like they had been reinforced with something I didn't understand. I glared at her. A gift? That felt more like you set my insides on fire. She didn't smirk, didn't joke. She just watched. That is because your body is resisting, she said calmly. It was never meant to hold such power. But now it must. I narrowed my eyes, shaking my head. That doesn't answer my question. She exhaled, stepping closer, towering over me with the kind of presence that made me feel like I was standing in the shadow of something far greater than I could comprehend. And then she said something that sent an ice-cold dagger straight through my spine. You are no longer just human. I felt the words before I fully understood them. They sat heavy in my gut, settling into a pit of unease, uncertainty, and something I didn't want to acknowledge: fear. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not possible. But even as I tried to deny it, I could feel it. Something was different. The Dominion soldiers I had fought earlier, they had been fast, precise, enhanced beyond normal human limits. I had barely been able to hold them off, and even then, it had been sheer luck and strategy that had let me walk away alive. But now, I could feel them. The ones still outside. The ones waiting in the shadows. I could hear their movements, the way their boots pressed into the wet pavement, the faint static hum of their encrypted comms buzzing just out of human hearing range. My mind processed their positioning, their heart rates, their breathing patterns, things no ordinary human should have been able to sense. I felt them, and that was when I realized she hadn't just changed me. She had awakened something inside me that had always been there. A truth too big to ignore. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unyielding. I looked down at my hands. They looked the same, but I could feel the difference. My bones didn't ache like they usually did after a fight. My muscles weren't fatigued. The old scars on my arms, ones I had earned from years of working with machines, cutting myself on sharp metal, burning my skin with plasma tools, were fading. Impossible. I turned to her. You need to start explaining. Now. She nodded, as if she had been waiting for this moment. You were chosen, she said simply. I barked out a laugh, shaking my head. Bullshit. I didn't sign up for any of this. No, she agreed. You did not. But your blood did. That made me pause. My blood? She folded her arms. The Dominion did not want you dead, human. They wanted you captured. Do you know why? I swallowed hard. I figured they didn't like me shooting up their men. She ignored my sarcasm. You are not ordinary. You never were. The only reason you have survived this long, the only reason you could keep up with them in battle, is because something inside you was already different. I clenched my jaw. That's not dash. But I couldn't finish the sentence. Because deep down, I had always known something was off. Ever since I was a kid, I had been stronger, faster, able to heal from wounds that should have left me bedridden for weeks. I had chalked it up to luck, good genetics, maybe just stubbornness. But now, standing here, with my senses screaming at me, my body thrumming with new energy, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I wasn't normal. I never had been. She watched as the realization sank in. Then she said, and now that I have given you this gift, the Dominion will stop at nothing to take you. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my temple. Great. Just what I needed. You do not understand, she pressed. They have hunted me because of what I am. Because of what I carry. I thought I could escape. I thought I could die before I let them take it back. I frowned. Take what back? She took another step closer, lowering her voice. The Dominion's greatest secret. The thing they have spent centuries hiding. A weapon so powerful, it could end them. I inhaled sharply. And you just gave it to me. She nodded. I exhaled. Fantastic. She took a slow breath. We need to leave. I raised an eyebrow. You're giving me orders now? I am telling you a fact. If we stay here, the next wave will come. And they will not stop. You must decide now, will you run? Or will you fight? I didn't answer immediately. Because I already knew the answer. I had been running my whole life. Running from the past, from my own questions, from the things I had never wanted to acknowledge about myself. But now, they had come for me. And I was done running. I looked at her. What's your name? She hesitated for a moment before answering. General Kayles. I smirked. Well, General Kayles, I hope you know what you're doing. Because if we're fighting back, we're going to need one hell of a plan. She returned the smirk. Oh, I have a plan. And with that, we stepped into the storm together. Chapter 4. The Dominion's Reckoning. The rain had not stopped. It poured over the neon-drenched Undercity like an endless deluge, thick and heavy, washing the streets clean but never erasing the filth that clung to old Bastion's bones. I could feel it in the air, the tension, the pressure, the weight of something far larger than myself moving into place. The Dominion had spent years hunting General Kaylee's, their black-clad operatives chasing her from system to system, never relenting, never stopping. And now, because of her, they were after me too. The thought should have terrified me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I could feel it, the change inside me, the raw power humming beneath my skin, the heightened awareness that had turned me into something I didn't yet understand. Every sound was sharper, every breath felt stronger, and the aches and pains I had carried from years of hard work and harder fights were gone. Whatever Kaylee's had done to me, whatever she had awakened, I wasn't just some back-alley mechanic anymore. And that meant I wasn't going to run. Not this time. Kaylee stood beside me in the shadows of the industrial zone, her golden eyes scanning the skyline with a practiced intensity. The Dominion's forces were out there, moving methodically, tightening the noose around us. I could hear them, feel them even when I couldn't see them, like whispers at the edges of my mind, their presence pressing down on the air itself. They were waiting, watching, preparing. Kaylee's turned to me. They will not give us another chance. This is our moment. I nodded, adjusting the grip on the pulse rifle I had scavenged from one of their fallen operatives. It felt lighter than it should have, like the weight of it was nothing in my hands. Another reminder that I was no longer the man I had been yesterday. What's the plan? I asked. She exhaled, steady and sharp. We split them. They rely on numbers, on overwhelming force. If we divide them, if we isolate them, we have a chance. And if that doesn't work? Her smirk was faint but dangerous. Then we make them bleed until they regret coming for us. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. Here we were, just two people, one wounded general and one newly enhanced nobody preparing to take on an unstoppable force. The Dominion had fleets, armies, resources beyond measure. They had shaped wars, toppled empires. But standing here, in the rain-soaked ruins of Old Bastion, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt ready. The first strike. We moved fast. Kaylee's took the west approach, slipping through the abandoned warehouse sector like a shadow, moving with the kind of deadly grace that only a lifetime of war could teach. I took the east, keeping low, letting the night swallow me as we flanked the first squad. There were 6 of them, moving in formation, silent, methodical, their armor absorbing the glow of the streetlights like void black phantoms. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I moved. Before they could react, I was inside their formation, faster than I had ever moved before. My hands knew what to do before my mind caught up. One soldier went down with a quick strike to the throat. Another crumpled as my stolen rifle discharged into his chest. The others turned, trying to react, but they were too slow. I ducked under a swinging rifle, twisted, grabbed the barrel of the gun, and used it to pull its wielder into the path of his own squad's fire. Plasma erupted through his armor, and then I was on the next one. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. Within seconds, all 6 of them lay broken in the alleyway, their bodies motionless against the cold pavement, and I was barely out of breath. I stared down at my hands, flexing my fingers. This was unnatural, but I didn't have time to question it. Kaylee's was counting on me. I activated my comm. First squad's down. Her response was immediate. Good. Stay sharp. More inbound. I exhaled. Let them come. The storm breaks. The Dominion had underestimated us. They had sent operatives expecting to capture a rogue general and an insignificant human. What they had found instead was something far worse. Kaylee's moved through their ranks like a force of nature. I watched her fight from the rooftops, her body fluid and unrelenting, her blade flashing between enemies with ruthless efficiency. She was faster than them, stronger, deadlier, even injured, even outnumbered. She was winning. And then I saw him. Saren, the same general who had spoken through the comms, the man who had commanded these operatives with the cold precision of a machine. He was watching from the far end of the battlefield, his stance rigid, his face unreadable. He wasn't moving. He was studying us. And that sent a chill through me. Because men like him didn't take risks unless they already knew the outcome. Something wasn't right. Then the sky split open. A massive drop ship descended, sleek and black, its hull reflecting the neon city lights as it deployed something massive onto the street below. A war machine. Tall, armored, pulsing with Dominion energy, a walking fortress built for destruction. And it was headed straight for Kaylee's. I didn't think. I just moved. The choice that changed everything. Kaylee's was still fighting, still holding her ground as the war machine's cannons charged with crackling plasma. It was preparing to fire. And she wasn't going to dodge in time. I acted on instinct. I threw myself into its path. The plasma blast hit me dead on. But I didn't die. The energy surged through me, wrapping around my body, crackling like it had found something it recognized, something familiar. I felt it bend, twist, reshape itself. Then I lifted my hand, and the energy obeyed. The Dominion's war machine faltered. Then its plasma core shattered. An explosion tore through the battlefield, sending debris flying, knocking soldiers to the ground. The air was thick with smoke, with fire, with the realization that something impossible had just happened. I stood in the aftermath, breathing hard, my body thrumming with power I didn't understand. Kaylee stared at me. Saren did too. And for the first time, the Dominion general looked afraid. You, he whispered. You were the failsafe. I took a step forward. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm the end of you. And then I attacked. The reckoning. The battle didn't last long after that. With their war machine destroyed, with Kaylee's unstoppable and me, whatever I had become, the Dominion forces broke. Saren fled. Not out of cowardice. Out of calculation. He had seen enough. He had realized what I was. And that terrified him. When the last of the Dominion operatives had been cut down, when the dust settled, Kaylee's turned to me. You changed everything tonight, she said quietly. I nodded. Yeah. She studied me for a long moment. Then she smirked. So, you want to see what else you can do? I grinned. Oh, absolutely. And as the rain finally began to slow, I realized this was just the beginning.